Hi, I'm Peter Cox. I'm from Sydney, Australia. And first I'd like to thank Professor Punch for inviting me to participate in this conference, which seems to be a very exciting project. I'm an economist, a financial analyst, a researcher, and my work is not done in universities. It's normally done for corporations and for governments on policy in the media, leisure and sporting sectors. And I've addressed over 70 conferences both in Australia and around the world on the future of media and leisure. And I write a lot of research reports and do television media interviews on the industry in Australia. Now, I'm really a behavioural economist, and the good thing about Bridge is we have both the individuals, the clubs, and the organisations. All right? And the thing about that is there's both great strengths and great weaknesses in those three categories. So I got into Bridge, love playing Bridge as we all do, which is why we're here. And I love the statistical analysis that really hasn't been done in much of a scale in Bridge before. And out of this, I've taken on a role as head of marketing for the Australian Bridge Federation, and to try and grow our sport in Australia. Now, the ABF, we have about 35,000 members normally, and 350 clubs spread right around Australia. Doing this conference and preparing this video, you know, when the conference is on, it'll be the middle of the night in Australia. So, you know, we are upside down, and as Professor Geoffrey Blainey said at one time and wrote in his book, Tyranny of Distance, and therefore how that shaped Australia, in the case of COVID, the tyranny of distance has probably been our great saviour. The first wave came like the rest of the world. We started early in March in 2020, and that was caused by, we had about 900, bit over 900 to 910 deaths caused by first the cruise ships, then the retirement villages, and then the hotel quarantine. But basically, we have not been greatly affected in Australia. In March, all the bridge clubs closed, and they were closed for, and the congresses were all cancelled for the next 3 months. But then after March, in June, some of the smaller states, South Australia, Western Australia, and parts of Queensland, about 36% of our membership went back to playing fairly quickly. So they went back in the middle of 2020 to playing. New South Wales came along a bit later, 2 or 3 months later. We'd had more shutdowns here because of the people coming in by ship and now by plane. And so we came on, and New South Wales is 32% of the share of members in Australia. And Victoria, we had the worst of it and where most of the deaths occurred, they actually didn't come on until about October, and they've got about 15% of the players in Australia. So it was a staggered return, right? In December 2020 and start of January, I ran a survey. Now the survey had about 30 questions. It was sent out to all of those we had on our mailing list, and went to about 10,000 people opened it, and 2,500 individuals responded. Now this is an extraordinary level. If I look at the main political polling systems done in Australia, they normally use a sample survey of 1,200 to 1,500, and we got 2,500 people to respond. And I think that just showed how vitally interested a certain segment of the bridge market is in the future of bridge, and their concerns about how bridge was going to go in the future. So that was it. that report I did on that goes for about 50 slides, so I'm not going to run them for you today. You don't have to panic on that. And a couple of hundred comments came with it as well. So there's a lot. I'm just going to put a few highlights out that I think fits the this segment, which is about what the world could expect post-COVID, and we in Australia have actually been able to experience it. So for the first slide. So the first question in the survey, and probably the most important result, was why do you play bridge? Now, I've broken it up into two different segments here. I weighted it to try and take out the weighting that was overweighted in the more experienced players. So on the left, you can see over here that this is for those with less than 50 master points. Now, social activity and new friends is the biggest driver with 40%. Mentally, looking for something mentally active to do, the fear of dementia in the future was another 33%, right? And competition here is relatively low at only 16%. Yes, they still want to have a game, but it is a social activity. So we can't be misled by thinking that bridge is all about competition. It's really about people wanting to be social, to make new friends, to have a good time. If we go over to the more experienced end, where over 1,000 master points, and remember that's 100,000 master points for you, that again, social still comes out very high. Social and mental is what? 56% of the factor of people, why people at that level why they want to play bridge. Competition, yes, it is higher in that level because they're playing in a lot more congresses, right? So the thing is, it's important that not only do our clubs have a great social environment, which many fail to do today, but it's important when Congress organisers are organising their events that they have to make their congresses as socially attractive as possible, because that is important to the good players, not only to the beginners. Here between 1 and 3 times a week before COVID. Now, online in Australia, before COVID, the 72% here was 0 and less than 1 means that really 80% of our players did not play online before COVID, right? So that's a really important factor. And the problem has been, how do we convert those people who are resistant to playing online? How do we get them to play online? Certainly the thing about those for Australia, online has been the saviour, since we brought it in, and we put in a club competition like you have on the EBU. I think within about 8 months we returned $600,000 to clubs, contribution to clubs who, let's face it, most of them were closed, not operating. They still had their rents had to be paid and other overheads. So this was a contribution the ABF was able to make by organising online events. So here's the question, where did you play then during COVID? Well, down here at the 5% none end, that's very low. Because of the bias within the survey sample, I think that is going to be much higher than 5%. They're probably double that or more who did not play at all. Now, the ones who did play were the ones, of course, who were in the states that opened up early. So again, not so significant. 57% said that they played online, right? And over here, a group that's not particularly big in Australia, which is friends playing or perhaps playing in private homes or in clubs. It's probably bigger in England than it is in Australia. But yes, it came into its own during COVID, that people felt comfortable going to each other's homes to play, and that became an alternative and something for them to get used to for the future. Okay. I suppose the big question, the $1 million question is, when will they return to the club? All right. Again, the not at all, 4%. Now that's a real worry at 4%, because as we've been saying, that 4% is probably double that. All right. Half of them said that they're playing now. Remember, I was doing this in December, January, they were filling this in right over the Christmas New Year period. So pretty well most of Australia was back, that people could have been playing in their clubs at that time. Now, 30% said that they would return when the restrictions lifted. Well, the restrictions in Australia have largely lifted, but we certainly haven't seen a complete return of players to playing bridge. The other 16% said they would return on vaccination. Well, Australia may have been highly successful in having a low death rate from COVID, but we've certainly not performed well on the vaccination. And the worrying thing about that is it's hard for us to run events that require people to be vaccinated, and yet we're a long way behind the UK and the US and other countries in our vaccination program. And that could become a problem to us when our major congresses are on at the end of the year. So that's an important aspect of it. Okay. Here's a good question. If you are likely to play less, why? Okay. Well, health concerns was the biggest category. Yes, that made sense. Older age group cohort, average age 74. Yes, they're concerned about catching COVID and how the death rate from that. They're now worried about the inoculation process. So health concerns came very high. We know from previous research that I've done on bridge that bridge players love travelling. So that the two go together. Some go on bridge holidays, others just love going on cruises. And they've really missed that over the last 12 or 18 months. And therefore, they're going to want to return to travelling. Right? Another threat is new activities and hobbies. Yes, I think we've all perhaps re-evaluated our lives to some degree during COVID. And therefore, there have been other attractions, and people have found that they actually enjoyed spending more time with their family back over here, the 17% wanting to spend more time with family in the future, taking up new activities and hobbies, and financial reasons. Even though we know bridge players on the whole are very financially sound, own their own homes, have investments in shares and property, the fact of life is COVID made everybody very cost conscious, and that is affecting the pricing now. Online bridge was priced far too low in comparison to in-club bridge, certainly in Australia. And that's causing resistance on the return. So there are a number of reasons why people are going to be reluctant to return. Okay, so the outcome of this is that the intention to play in congresses after COVID, you can see here, the local is going to be the least affected, right? People can drive to it. It's only an hour. I call local within, say, an hour to 2 hours drive. And that mightn't even be negative. That may be positive over time. State, that is where you have to spend at least 2 to 3 hours to go to a major state event. And you can see that's going to be down by 5%. And interstate, some people may call interstate national competitions, but what I really meant by interstate was when you had to go and book a hotel room and book airline tickets to go to one, and therefore considerable outlay, that the interstate ones are likely to be the ones most affected going into the future. So now we come to the I suppose the controversial one there's going to be. Here I've charted out what the members are for both the ABF and the EBU over the last 10 odd years. And as you can see here, with the red one is the EBU, the yellow one is Australia in our Olympic colours, it's like green edge. You can see that the peak was around about 2014 in both cases, right? That we grew in that period, and then we declined, and only small amounts, but certainly no growth. So those wanting to put in, we're going to achieve growth. That was not going to happen. And then I came into it back here. We got a kick up in Australia in about 2019, but then COVID hit. Now, these times at the end here where you can see, they differ between the countries as to when your end of your membership years are and your master point years are. The important thing for this is in Britain in 2020 you actually put on. I know the EBU have been working hard to increase memberships in the UK, and that was successful. In England they had gone up to 55,000. Now we'll be waiting to see when the March figures are produced as to what happened. In Australia, we had an unusual situation that when it hit in March, the end of our master points, which is what our master point system that determines, that is at the end of March. And COVID hit just before that. And a lot of the state bodies said to their clubs, clean out your deceased players and your unlikely to be playing in the future, and so that you don't have to pay your ABF membership. We pay ABF memberships on our players. We don't have a table system like you have in the EBU or in America. So that hurt us, and badly, in that first month. And then when we got to this March, right, when the same thing, when they're in the same position, and a lot of people haven't come back to bridge, aren't playing so much bridge. There's been no congresses, so people haven't needed to have their master points to earn gold points, etc., for going to masters. And we got a fall there of something like 3,500 people, which, you know, is a pretty terrifying experience. Now, we know that as the year goes on, that 29,778 that you can see here will grow. It's already growing, because as people find that to get their master points in their clubs, they actually have to be members. They're now contacting us and saying, oh, can you put us back in the system and, you know, pay their membership. But this is very scary, the fall in points here. So in membership at least. So to go on now really to the last one, I've just expressed the same information in the last slide. I've put it in this way because it makes it look more dramatic, and you can see the effect of it, right? That the drop has been substantial. Now, for instance, in our period of October to December, when most bridge clubs were back in Australia, the points earned in clubs, not in congresses because congresses weren't running, the points learnt in clubs were down by 28%. In the 3 months from January to March, those were down on the corresponding period in the previous year, were down by about 11.7, 12%. So it is improving, but the numbers are substantially down, and that is really important. Right? The other thing you've got to consider in this is that with doing congresses, in Australia we had a 4 square metre rule for separation of people. Now it's been reduced in most places to 2 square metres, but that has meant that some of our hotels and places that we were playing congresses in, that now if you have to have a 2 square metre rule per head of people there, that means you have to reduce the number of tables quite substantially, and that makes congresses not be viable. For example, one of our popular ones, which is off at Coffs Harbour, that has just been cancelled because of that 2 square metre rule. They didn't have a viable financial plan to be able to take the whole place and yet have far less tables there. So that has a substantial factor on it. In blue there, I've just sneaked in the blue you can see it's for the ACBL. Now, I actually had to do a whole lot of averaging there, but the ACBL has been losing members and losing table numbers at about 1 to 2% a year over the period. So one of the big questions that I raise here is, you saw the earlier graph where we were struggling before COVID, all right? That as a result of that, was COVID the effect, or was it a tipping point? And that weakness is going to be continued out into the future. So I think this is a worrying time. On the last slide, if you want to contact me, then please do. Later in the Congress on Thursday, the 1st of July at 4:30 British Standard Time, there is going to be a session on marketing, and I'm going to look at somewhat the future marketing of bridge and what some ideas as to how we might try and get some of these players back. We've got a lot of people out there that haven't been playing bridge that we need to get back into bridge. So I would welcome you to come and join us. I'm sorry for this taking so long, but I hope you have found it of some interest. Thank you very much.